Hello, my friends. Today I wanted to talk to you about something very close to my heart, the sister science to yoga, that is also called Ayurveda. So, sister science because they work very well together. Actually, separately, they're both very holistic, but together, they're even more so. So, they're very coherent with each other. And Ayurveda means the science of life. And if you will, we can actually call it the Indian medicine, the same way we talk about Chinese medicine. So it's a whole science to itself, and you have doctors in Ayurveda, not to mistake with people like me who are just studying it and who are yoga teachers and whatnot and who are consultants and all kinds of stuff. There are actual doctors of Ayurveda, okay, who studied this for a certain amount of years, etc. Um, I wanted to talk to you about Ayurveda from my perspective with this more yoga psychology point of view, because for me it is such a perfect way of explaining so much of what I want to say, but also so much of what the West is saying, but missing out on certain things, for instance, due to actually the imbalances that we can find as well, which I will get into in a moment. So, why am I saying this? Well, before I go into the more uh, macro perspective to start to explain the logic behind Ayurvedic science, even just as the micro, the smaller part, the parts of who we are, there's never an idea in Ayurveda of changing anything inside of you, okay? You are completely perfect the way you are. So a lot of people can get the misunderstanding that depending on the constitution that they have, where there's one that's more than the other two, for instance, of the three doshas, the energies, they might have this idea that the goal would be to even the three out or to change in any way whatever they have, and that is not at all the case. Actually, you are born with one constitution that will stay with you for the rest of your life, and you are not supposed to try to change it. It is impossible for you to do so anyway, and you will definitely go into dis-ease if you try to do so. So there's a beauty in this concept that what you are is extremely unique in itself because you are your constitution. I'll get into more what that is, for all the different reasons that you are where you are today. And everyone is completely unique, and that in itself is complete. All right, so there's a wholeness in there. There's a perfection in there, and obviously, I find that very interesting. Now, what's really helping us when it comes into what I talk about in yoga psychology and the way why we do the things we do and how we do them and why we become a certain way is that due to then our constitution as well, we have these tendencies. Now, this is what's interesting. So we have tendencies to go towards something, to go in excess towards something or to lack of something due to our constitution. And so the tendencies will be basically what feels easy for us. And that's very often what we go for, isn't it? When we're in a situation where there's tension, when there's frustration, discomfort, what we tend to do is that we grab for what goes easiest, what feels like in the moment is going to bring us peace. That is basically a definition of addiction in itself, isn't it? Or habitual behaviors. And so by learning a little bit about this science of life, how it all works, and then more specifically to know thyself, to know a little bit more about you, you can begin to observe these tendencies that you will have, and therefore catch them early on. Be the parent to yourself of realizing you're going far off in this end here, and let's bring it back again. And that's how we then find homeostasis or balance. All right, so Now that I've made a bit of an introduction on this, let's come down to what it really means. And I'm going to have a sip of tea just to show you as well that this is my way of trying to go against certain of my tendencies. So I need something nurturing and warming in my VATA climate that I'm in at the moment. I would have reached for a coffee very easily due to my PITTA, but knowing that I need something a little bit more bitter that brings me down and calms me will be more beneficial with some rooibos tea. Anyway, so Ayurvedic's perspective on the global. Everything is made up of matter, because that's what we see, and that's made up of 5 elements. Now, we know the 5 elements, specifically in the yogic philosophy. Sometimes we talk about a different number, but 5 elements is what we talk about in Ayurvedic or yogic philosophy, and actually, if you would take it into more modern stuff, quantum mechanics and physics. So, what would be the 5 elements? Well, from dense to light, let's say from gross to subtle, we have earth, we have water, we have fire, we have air, and we have ether or space itself. So everything around us in the world, and we are part of that, is made up by the 5 elements. Now, these 5 elements in Ayurveda has been pulled together or defined as well in energetic form. And so then we speak of 3 energies. And it's what we also then call in the more Sanskrit term a dosha. So I will be referring to the doshas from now on. And remember that this is then, let's say, like a quality a little bit. It's an energy, okay, from dense to light, okay. And so the 3 doshas are then Kapha, Pitta, and Vata. So Kapha is basically earth contained in water. So it's got a very heavy quality to it. It's a heavy energy, heavy and dense. And then we have Pitta, which is fire that's contained in water. Very prominent is the fire part of this, okay? But there's the water as well that contains the fire and brings a certain stickiness actually into its quality, into that energy. And then we have the third energy, which is Vata, and that is actually air contained in ether or space. So in case you're not really understanding this idea of ether or space, you can go and have a look online. I'm not going to go too much into detail about it right now, but basically ether or space, not to mistake for ether as in chemical element, is everything actually is held in ether or space. So when we talk about air, we talk more about the wind, okay? It's the air that moves, whereas space is actually beyond that. It's like empty space, right? So you might have heard about how nothing is really solid, if you have ever been interested in the more new agey and of course quantum perspective of things, but that if you would go down on the molecule level, it's actually the molecules and the density actually of their presence that will bring an aspect of more or less solid. And what actually keeps the molecules together is space. Anyway, now that we've cleared that one up, and you can check it online to go into more depth about it. If we then start to look into these doshas, these energies, everything is made up of the 5 elements and also therefore of these energies. We can see that in the earth, everything that is around us, so when I'm saying the earth, I mean the planet, everything that is around us in nature can easily be defined by these energies. And we can see how, of course, there's all three of them in everything, but you can definitely see that there's a tendency, or there's a very prominent part. So, for instance, then we talk obviously about earth and water and fire and air in itself, and we can see that leaves, for instance, a very good example. Leaves of plants and trees will have a different kind of aspect depending on which kind of climate it's existing in. So, when we have a climate, like for instance, where I am right now in the northern hemisphere and in the northern part of it, which is Scandinavia, we have quite a lot of VATA in the climate in itself. And we can then also see that a lot of the leaves of the plants and the trees are quite thin and long and dry. Whereas if we would look into another part of the world that's quite opposite to this, for instance, where I usually live, down in the tropics, in Indonesia, the plants and the trees have quite different leaves. They're very thick and they're dark and they're waxy in their texture, because they're also in a very different climate, which is, I would say, probably more a PITTA kind of climate. So everything that grows in nature then takes on the aspects, of course, of the energy that's prominent where they are. And when it comes to animals as well, for instance, I was thinking about this the other day. Just take the very typical animal that would define what a vata quality would be, and that resides in the vata element. A little bird, for instance. A little bird is light and dry and moves all the time and is very creative, beautiful singer, for instance, and such. Okay, and then on the contrary, if we would look into an animal that lives in a much denser environment, maybe even a rather heavy, kind of earthy, watery environment, like let's say the rainforest, let's say the African rainforests, where you would find an elephant, then we can see that the qualities physically, nonetheless, maybe even mentally, of an elephant are very relatable to the Kapha energy. We will then, of course, the reason I'm saying this is because when we then start to talk about us, the human beings, we will actually then recognize as well the aspects of these animals inside ourselves, depending on these doshas. So this is what I'm trying to kind of like narrow it down for you. So the way Ayurveda then explains our coming into the world will therefore be quite similar to just the Western medicine when we talk about DNA. So that when you're born, you get the DNA of your parents, basically, right? You get the DNA of your parents, and you will inherit a lot of qualities that they have. And we know today that there's a lot of those qualities maybe that are biological, but there's a lot, much more maybe even, that's not so much biological, but actually things that we catch on when we, grow up with the parent. And when it comes to Ayurvedic perspective on this, it's the same thing. So, depending on the constitution of your parents, you will have basically the same, or you will have some kind of combination of your two parents. So, there's several things actually that go in to what your constitution would be. There's what the constitution of your parents are, where in the world the constitution happened, not where you were born necessarily, but where it happened. So geographically speaking, when as well during the year it happened, so which quality was maybe more prominent at that time of the year, all of that will play in as you are being created. And then you will come into this life and you will have your constitution and it's perfect. And actually, when you come into this world, the balance between the three is perfect, and each and one of them are perfect. Well, when I'm saying the balance between the three is perfect, I'm not saying that it's equal. No? Okay, so it's not striving to find an equal level of each. Once again, now what this will bring into you is that you will have, and this is very much, let's say, what the Ayurvedic medicine then focuses on as we try to cure disease, for instance, or just staying balanced as well, is that you will have a metabolic rate that is very specific to you. So it's very specific then to the exact combination of these doshas that you have when you are born. Once you're born then. So the metabolic rate basically is how quickly in a certain way you consume calories and then transform them into energy. And in Ayurvedic science and in the kitchen as well, because that's a lot where things happen actually, due to this fact that we start with the metabolic rate, we talk about Agni. They talk about Agni, more specifically if they're fluent in Sanskrit because it's a Sanskrit word, but Agni is translated into the English language with the word fire, okay? So it's the combustion rate, basically, in your digestive system. And this makes sense on many levels because obviously one way for us to survive is to eat, right? To eat and drink, etc. But actually, we get energy in us in different ways, not only by the food and the drinks. So what we are capable of doing with our digestive system will be crucial to how our all over health will be in general, if it's effective, if it's hyper, if it's hypo. Okay, so my metabolic rate, which is set by, it's like a set point, by the dosha combination that I have, the qualities, the energies that I have inside of me, are all perfectly set as I'm being born. And they are being influenced, sorry for the pause that I made there, but that's just to make sure that you're all settling down with the information that I've given you. They're being influenced by the macro and the micro. So it means that the energetic balance that's outside of you will have an influence on how you're feeling, and then also the inner environment will also have an influence on how your doshas are doing. And because of this, we not only talk about how it is in the world, in nature, where you're born, and how you are eating things, but also the fact that during the year in itself and during the day in itself, or the 24 hours, there will be then moments where each and one of these doshas are stronger or dominant. Okay, and so that means that we can also play around with, depending on which kind of climate I'm in and which kind of constitution I have, to make sure that there's an extra activity at a certain time of the day, and then in other times of the day I don't do so much. A very typical example of this is how in the southern European countries, more specifically Spain and Portugal, and they have implemented since a very long time siesta, which is basically that in the middle of the day, when it's at the hottest and the sun is the highest, we take rest to not overdo it, to not overburn. And maybe we could also see in there that in in those countries, not specifically maybe in those countries, but in the West in itself anyway, there's quite a lot of pitta, so the fiery one. So naturally, a pitta person, who's someone who is dominant in pitta and who has these tendencies to go into excess towards fire, towards overheating, when they're in a climate as well where it's already quite pitta dominance, then at the hottest time of the day, it's probably a good idea to not overdo it by going out exercising in the sun. Now, funnily enough, that's exactly where you will find the pitta people easily. At the middle of the day, out in the sun, just enjoying so much the sun, and then obviously burning the candles at both ends, like they say. So this is where it's interesting how we have these strange tendencies we go towards things. Because since we have it inside of us already, it just is so easy to go in that direction. So it's a little bit this idea of getting caught up in the narrative that does not necessarily translate a reality. So how far have I come into this? So you are born, you're perfectly constituted in your doshas, and you have your metabolic rate, and you are so influenced by the environment that you are born into. And then we go on in life. And so I'm not going to go too much into detail into each and one of the personality types, because I really don't want to have that approach to this day. There's so many videos and things out there anyway, and what's the personality of the pitta and the vata and the dosha and the kapha, doshas. But I want to take this into a much more clinical study. So clinical means case by case. And which is what I find so interesting with the Ayurvedic perspective, is that, yes, we explain everything this way, but you can narrow it down so much into its uniqueness of the constitution of the person, that one of the main things that Ayurveda speaks of, and that we have come very far from, is self-referral. And so what is self-referral? It's our capacity to actually analyze what is going on with us. So you are perfectly capable of, once that you have then understood what these three energies are like, to begin to look into yourself and to actually then, first of all, see what seems to be the tendency in you. Where can you see dominance? And then not only that, but also when it comes to what you then put into your body, how do you react to it? So, for instance, let's take something once again of a quite extreme example of a kapha person. Okay, so remembering that kapha is water and earth, and that it has this heaviness inside of it, and it's also quite cold and slow. So the same way I was talking about the elephant earlier on, it's also like, just take the fish for instance. It's something that's very dense, and it's not very fast and going in all directions, but it's contained much more. And so, for instance, when it comes to the types of food that are very kapha dominating, we will also then talk about heavy, sticky, cold food. So maybe it will ring a bell for you. For me, straight away, it makes me think of ice cream. And ice cream and all kinds of dairy are, in effect, very high kapha energy. Now, what happens is that when we then have a lot of the kapha energy in us, we get congestion, because actually in the body, the kapha manifests, amongst other things, as mucus. As you can imagine, it's more of a dense and heavy quality, and it's sticky, and it's watery, and it's cold. And so as you may know, I hope you do, that when you have a cold, adding on extra of dairy, for instance, like ice cream or milk or butter, is not really the best thing to do, because you will actually increase in the mucus, in the phlegm. So instead, what we want to do when we have a cold is to heat the body up and dry it out. And so then increase actually the pitta, but also the vata, as a way to dry out and help the body come back to balance. And one of the tendencies, then, the same way that I explained a little bit ago about the typical pitta person who will then love going out in the sun and go for a run, or do some physical exercises. I'm having an image in my head about from Miami, of the guys standing there by the beach in the middle of the day and they're sweating, and that's all extremely pitta, obviously. And then they burn and then they get an ulcer and then whatever. Maybe not everyone. In another way, then, talking about the kapha person, and once again, I'm kind of generalizing and I'm making it a little bit of an extreme, but it's just to get a bit of an idea of it. That would be, let's say, for instance, when everything just seems to go wrong, and so you don't actually have a fire inside of you that pushes you to go and move forward. It's actually more than the kind of tendency of slowing down, closing in, depression, and I want to say kind of just like watch rom-coms and eat ice cream on the sofa. It's generalizing, and I might not even be enough in the details, but it's just to give you an idea. So, when it comes to these elements, how they present themselves in our physical body is then, as I mentioned earlier, the mucus very much for kapha. Sorry, I'm losing my words. For kapha, actually, it all kind of starts with the digestive system, as you have already kind of understood. And in the digestive system, we will have a representation of kapha in the stomach. And we will have a representation of the pitta in the small intestines. And then we will have the representation or the home of vata in the colon. Which means that when everything functions properly on the three, we digest the food properly, we transform quickly with the enzymes and stuff into the skin, into all the systems of the body, into the circulation, and we will also eliminate through the colon without any issues. It's not going to be constipation. You're not going to be bloating or gassy. That's when everything, when the wheel is just functioning, right? And so then, when there's imbalance, it starts from the digestive system, and we can start with small things like, for instance, I'm noticing that I'm not digesting my food, and so I feel heavy on my stomach, and so there's a bit of a imbalance that's starting maybe in my kapha in that case. And then for the pitta, it would be maybe the other way around. So it could be a very, very fast digestion. That can maybe even more be that I'm starting to notice heartburn. So these acid refluxes that happens, diarrhea, and just hangry, that's just that eat, I need to eat, I need to eat, and then you get angry because you're so hungry, and instead then on the vata side, it would be that you just basically haven't been to the bathroom for 3 days, but bloating and gassy, and my bowel movements are out of whack and all of that. So those are like small signs of imbalances in the doshas that's quite common anyway, and that we usually manage to balance out ourselves quite well. I'm just having a look. Already up into half an hour. So I'm going to narrow this down a little bit. And anyway, so this is how we find the origin or the home of each and one of the doshas, the energies in the body. We will then see how they translate into the skin, the eyes, the face, the teeth, the lips, the hair, And therefore, in the Vata person, since it's the wind and the ether and the fact of actually that it's drying out, it will show up in quite light and rather dry hair, quite straight dry hair, probably pretty light colored hair as well, quite small eyes, and rather dry skin. Rather dry skin, small lips, and the limbs are quite long. So it's quite common to have Vata people who are pretty tall and thin. So their constitution in itself is pretty thin. Their hands and their feet and such will usually also maybe be quite big. And it's just quite a long and thin kind of person. And on the Pitta, we will find this instead of a bit smaller than the Vata person, but just quite a normal size for, let's say, what we would see as normal then, I guess, as in a not too tall, not too small. Hard to, obviously, what is normal, but not someone that you would be like, oh, that person is tall, or that person is really small. It's just quite average. Their constitution of the body is quite proportional as well. So the hands aren't too big or too small. You will feel, though, that there's a difference when it comes to the stickiness of Pitta that will bring a brightness and an intense look in the eye, and it will bring more of an oiliness into the hair than the Vata that has no stickiness at all. Of course, if you've got red hair, then it's very fiery, very Pitta. Also, probably bigger teeth, and a quite strong muscular constitution. So Pitta will, because of its really good capacity to transform the energy, or the food into energy, I should say, then transforms as well the energy very well into muscles. So you will have, it feels quite male in itself, Pitta, in that sense, because it's the direction, it's the male energy anyway, it's very yang, it's fire, it's movement, it's going towards this direction. And so it's these strong bodies that can easily be built up into strong bodies, whereas a Vata body will be much weaker in itself and can probably be quite flexible, but then have very fragile joints, and so will end up hurting themselves more easily. When we then look into the Kapha dominance, what we would find in the body, we would find really quite oily skin, really big, beautiful eyes, thick, dark, usually hair, really thick. A Kapha person rarely gets wrinkles, for instance. So you can, from this information, just start to look into yourself. So it's interesting, of course, to have a little bit of a look at, what's my dominance? Knowing that you have all three, and you usually have one or two that are equal to each other. I myself, for instance, have definitely two of them that are, when I've done tests and when I've seen a doctor, seems to be very similar on this kind of similar level. Might be one that's above the other. So I'm not going to say anything, and I'm going to let you leave in a comment below what you think, knowing that I had that warm tea to balance out in the cold here and the dryness, and I should have obviously have a tendency to go towards the coffee, but I know that I shouldn't. So it's interesting to play around with and have a look at what your constitution is. But what I really wanted to talk to you about today, and which is what I will end with then, is this tendencies that we have to go towards one direction or another because it's what's easy for us, but it's actually going to bring us into excess about something, and therefore will bring us off balance. And you can see this. I mean, we live in a world where geographically Vata and Pitta have been very dominant in the West, and the West have been very dominant in basically ruling the world at this time of the paradigm of the planet right now. And so everything easily gets in excess when it comes to Vata and Pitta, because that's what we're kind of inviting people to do, to have that kind of lifestyle. It's the always go further, always push through. It's heating everything more and more and more. It's always on the move. It's very airy and very up in the, thinking about things and ideas about things, and anything that kind of has this more the old world of the Orient, maybe that's more of, you can even see obviously that the physical features of Asians are much more the type of the Kapha. But that's we've pushed that down, and so there's a lot of the habits that we have developed in the West, and actually, weirdly enough, a lot of the habits now, when it's this whole kind of coming back into something more spiritual and changing the way we deal with things and whatnot, that are actually not really going in the right direction, but that we keep pushing on our Vata and our Pitta in these new habits that we've taken on. Um, and so they're not always helping us. So it's a way to leave an open window for you for reflection in, who am I? What's my constitution? What are my tendencies? And how can I then balance them out by actually practicing the opposite of what that tendency would be, in order to find more balance in life. And once again, let me know in the comments below if you want to have other videos on this matter that would be more going into detail, for instance, about one dosha or another, or the imbalances, or the way you would eat. All right, have a lovely day.